Welcome to Women Got Game, where we uncover untold stories of extraordinary women in sports across Northwest Ohio and beyond. I'm Sophia Fisher, and we're going to celebrate the evolution of female athletes, coaches, and sports enthusiasts. Let's dive into a world often overlooked in the broader sports narrative. Ready to explore? Let's play. In this episode, we sit down with Dr. Christy Halbert, an expert in women's boxing, a former 2012 Olympic coach, and an IWBHF inductee. She currently owns a boxing gym in Nashville called Fighters and is on the board of directors of the USA Boxing Organization. Today, we explore the evolving landscape of women's boxing. We discuss the challenges and achievements that female boxers face. Dr. Halbert also shares insights into her book, The Ultimate Boxer, and sheds light on the representation of women in the 2024 Olympics. Join us as we delve into the world of women's boxing, discussing what it takes to succeed and be recognized as the ultimate boxer in a sport historically dominated by men. Welcome, Christy.
Hey, Sophia. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you, and I had the privilege to meet you when you were in our wonderful city of Toledo, and we hosted the inaugural USA Women's Boxing Championships that took place last summer in July at the Glass City Center. And you also introduced me to a fabulous female boxer, Casey Dial, who's up and coming, and I'm blessed to now serve as her agent. So you certainly know talent and the sport of boxing. So let's just dive in, and let me ask the first question here. And this is probably one of the most important, most important question probably. What inspired you to become involved in women's boxing? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I did not have a boxing background at all. I'm a Title IX baby, so I did play Division I college volleyball in college, and was fortunate enough to have a scholarship that paid for most of my education, and then I did some track and field to pay for the rest of it. And I needed a little bit of money to fix a car. I entered a kind of a local, what was called a King and Queen of the Hill contest. I ended up winning that thing, and just on sheer athleticism. When you're a big girl, at least when I was growing up, people didn't really mess with me, so I never had to really throw punches or anything like that. But I was physical and athletic, and I won that. And my sociology professor at the time said, "Hey, you're going to graduate school. You ought to consider studying women professional boxers." I looked into it. Nobody studied women professionals in the sport, and I didn't want to. I had my eyes set on studying other things, but at the end of my first year, I presented a list of topics to my committee, and everyone wanted to hear more about women professional boxers. So I did some research there and actually published on women professional boxers. And then I had a short stint as a professional boxer myself because I needed a little more money. And I started coaching because I could tell at the time that a lot of people, at least the way boxing used to work, a lot of people were being trained by people who thought they could make money off of them as professionals. And if they didn't think they could make money off of a person, then they really ignored them. And so I saw a lot of people getting ignored in the different gyms I was training in, and I decided to try my hand at coaching. Professional boxing wasn't a great fit for me, and so I started focusing on coaching and worked my way up through the USA Boxing ranks. I was really successful as a coach, and started coaching the national team, and was really successful there. And that led to an opportunity to coach the team at the 2012 Olympic Games, and super proud that we came back with a gold medal from Clarissa Shields, a middleweight from Flint, Michigan, and a bronze medal from Marlene Esparza, a flyweight from the Houston, Texas area.
Yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely. I look at now in the world of boxing. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that female boxers face in the sport today?
Challenges for women boxers are very similar to challenges that other girls and women might face in other sports. So there's definite lack of opportunities in training, in competition. There is still stigma attached to participating in boxing. There are barriers to entry. Boxing is a relatively inexpensive sport to participate in, but it still takes money. It takes money to take time off from work, to travel to competitions, to put a support team together if you need, for example, nutrition. Healthy food can be expensive. So it does end up costing a lot. Whether you're an amateur or a professional, you do have to put together those resources, and where a male boxer can sometimes do a GoFundMe or find a local sponsor or someone to endorse an endorsement. Usually those same opportunities at the moment are not available to women. They're few and far between.
So do you think it's really the main factors contributing to these disparities are that there is lack of sponsorships and endorsements between women's versus men's boxing, or is it more of finding not just necessarily big brands, but is it in clubs that support the individual? How does that work, or what needs to be done?
It's a little bit of everything. Women boxers report that they want to be in supportive boxing gyms, and sometimes that can be difficult to find. They also want opportunities to develop, not just compete, but also develop, and that can be difficult to find, camps, clinics, things like that. And then, of course, the competition opportunities, the ability to work their way up the pathway if they want to be an Olympian, or on the pro level, the opportunity to fight for a purse that would be something that they could actually live on. Sometimes it can be difficult to find promoters that are paying a living wage as opposed to promoters that maybe want the boxer to sort of prove themselves for a while until they become a bigger name. So on both levels, amateur and pro, women boxers are facing some barriers.
So as far as the future is concerned, what do you think needs to be done to really help? Is it in the promotion? Is it in the media following women's boxing and getting more broadcast opportunities out there? What do you think really needs to happen to move the needle?
To move the needle, one of the biggest things that we need is exposure. We can turn on the television and see men professional boxers. We can tune into websites that talk about men professional boxers. Information on women is still falling behind. As far as the amateurs go, the same kind of thing, where we just need more exposure. More people need to know about women boxers and the courage, the heart. If they can see it, if they can see the demonstration of courage and heart, the perseverance that it takes to face another people in the squared circle, then they usually become fans right away.
Tell us, does the scoring differ from women's boxing to men's boxing?
Women's and men's boxing is, the rules are identical. The matches are scored the same way. Both women's and men's boxing have weight categories. What's different is that the weight categories are usually focused more on the lighter side for women. And then there are some professional bodies that still have women boxing 2-minute rounds as opposed to the standard 3-minute round. And, I've talked to promoters who have told me if they had their way, they would have men boxing 2-minute rounds as well, because at the end of the day, the reason they want women boxing 2-minute rounds is because it forces the women to be more active. And they would love for some of their men to have to box 2-minute rounds because the action would be forced that way. But they don't feel like they could do that with men, so they do it with women instead. These days, there are some women pros that are boxing 3-minute rounds. On the amateur level, women are boxing 3-minute rounds. I've served on the Women's International Commission. I started serving on that when it was formed in 2006. And one of the most important things that we worked on was making sure that anywhere that there was a rule difference that was arbitrary, that we got rid of that. Because we believe that the competition rules should be the same between women and men. And unless someone could argue that there was a necessary difference in the rules, we believe that the rules should be the same. And so one of the things that we did was advocated for 4 2-minute rounds. Back when women could only do 3 2-minute rounds, men were doing 4 2-minute rounds, and then men went to 3 3-minute rounds. And I think it was the next year we were able to get women switched to 3 3-minute rounds as well. So if there's no basis for a rule difference, our policy was to make sure that the competition rules were the same for women and men.
Sure. So would you say, what are the common misconceptions, if any, about women's boxing that you'd like to address and share?
One of the main misconceptions about boxers in general is that they box from a place of emotion or hatred for their opponent. Boxing from an emotional place is not sustainable. A person can't have that. They can't box from a place where they're externally motivated. Boxing is so difficult. You really have to have that internal motivation. And so one of the things that people are surprised to learn when they start boxing or following their favorite boxers is that really boxers are very even-tempered for the most part. And when you see them getting excited, that's usually, to try to sell some tickets or something like that, for the media, some excitement there. But boxers have to learn to regulate their emotions. I would say generally that's a misconception about boxing overall. For misconceptions related to women boxers, I think most people are surprised that women don't have the same resources that men have. That was one of the problems that we ran into advocating for women's boxing in the Olympic Games. So in 2008, boxing was the only sport in which there was still a ban on women's participation. And so we circled up and decided that we really had to, we were going to have to make a concerted effort for 2012. It was not going to happen automatically. And I believed at the time that education was going to make the difference. And what I realized was that there were actually some people out there that just didn't like the idea of women doing certain things, including boxing. And so for the women's boxing movement, we had to address that barrier. We also had to address the issue, I thought education was the secret. There were a lot of people out there that really did assume that women and men had the same resources. And so we had to explain that actually boxing doesn't allow women, and we're trying to change that. So, and that, I think that persists even today when people just assume that women and men have the same prize money. For example, if you look at the International Federation right now, they're offering different prize money for men and women. The women's is less. And certainly we see that on the professional level as well, where a male professional that goes for his first challenge for a world championship could make potentially over $1 million, and women just are not in that level yet, which is really interesting to me most recently that Jake Paul and his association is trying to change that. And he's made a promise to pay women professionals on his card the same as the men. So that's a very exciting opportunity. And also he's doing that so publicly. Jake Paul is a huge figure, and for him to point out the disparity and that he's going to use his resources to try to change that that's going to move the needle in a big way.
So when we talk about disparities in sponsorships and endorsements between men's and women's boxing, don't you think there's an opportunity for brands to really stand out when they support a female boxer, because it offers them a niche area, and again, it's obviously helping female boxing, but at the same time, doesn't it really help brands stand out?
Sponsorships and endorsements are not only important for the athletes or the teams, but also important for the brands. And in fact, in 2012, Michael Phelps made the most money on endorsements of any athlete, the swimmer, Michael Phelps.
Yes.
But Marlon Esparza, the boxer, was actually the most endorsed boxer at those games. She had Coca-Cola and Nike and a bunch of other brands. And that allowed her to stay in the Olympic pipeline and then also launch a professional career at the same time, bringing a new audience to those sponsors. And I would say to any sponsor out there, when you bring a woman boxer on board, you're bringing everything about her that it takes to succeed in the ring. You're bringing on someone who embodies resilience, perseverance, courage, heart. Anyone who's actually climbed through the ropes knows what it takes to face off with somebody else, face to face. If you and I are playing basketball, we might get a little rough and tumble in the paint, but we're not looking at each other. We're using our elbows, we're using our bodies, whatever, to box out. Well, we're not looking at each other. Women boxers look at each other, face their fears, face a formidable opponent, and any brand that is looking for someone who's fierce, who can represent a fierce or a brand that's looking to set themselves apart from everyone else, women's boxing is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, talk about leaning in, right? It's like, I like your examples you're giving because obviously there's nothing been bigger than this last women's basketball season with Caitlin Clark and looking at what she's been able to do for women's basketball, collegiate and other, into the WNBA now. But I love your examples because it still is women in sport, and what we're trying to do is move the sport forward. So in looking at boxing, it seems like it's more of an individualized sport. And I really love what you said about, you're looking at each other, you're taking a punch, you're taking a hit, and that type of intensity is quite different. But also, I would think it lends itself to a lot of brands being able to stand out, and not the traditional brands that we're used to seeing that maybe make, boxing equipment or whatnot. So I really think that would definitely help in the future if we could get sponsors to really back more of these great athletes. So let's talk about the future of women's boxing. How do you see it unfolding in the future?
Well, when we started Olympic boxing in 2012, we had 3 weight categories only. So there were 10 men's categories, 3 women's categories. And then that increased in 2020 or 21. It was a COVID situation. And then in 2024, we've got 6 women's categories and 7 men's categories. So that alone is huge in terms of exposure because we have more opportunities to have champions. And the talent pool has become more dense on the Olympic tournament level. So you're going to see some very exciting bouts at the 2024 Olympics, and the 2028 Olympics are in Los Angeles. Boxing's huge in the United States, so there's a big opportunity there for some U.S. sponsors to move in and grab up some of those boxers that they believe are going to be or currently Olympic hopefuls, and they're going to be representing the U.S. on home soil. That is very exciting.
So that visibility with the upcoming 2024 Olympics will definitely impact perception, development of the sport, and hope that more people tune in. And then with that media representation and exposure, the hope is that more brands will jump on board, right?
Yeah, one of the things that, unfortunately, there's a lot of Olympic sports. So you turn on the television or even streaming services, and boxing's extremely popular among fans. People want to see it, but at the end of the day, the streaming service or the channel, they're trying to spread their exposure across a lot of different sports. So when I think of that, I think, we're women athletes in general, women's sports in general, benefits from having Olympic inclusion because it's the Olympic inclusion gives legitimacy to women's pursuit in that sport. And in boxing, it's especially important. That's why I think women's boxing is an important part of the women's movement, and certainly an important part of the women's sport movement. But in general, when people who may want to discriminate against women in general, if they want to discriminate against them, and then they turn on the television or their favorite app and they see women boxing and they see the displays of strength and courage, I think it becomes more difficult for them to then discriminate against women in other ways. And so for me, women's boxing is a very important part of the movement. Any brand that would want to be associated with progress for women, I think, would want to jump on board with supporting women's boxing.
So are there any particular female boxers or stories that you could share that you find particularly inspiring?
As an Olympic coach, I've had to over the years be really careful not to become a fan of certain women athletes, and instead, I gotta really be focused on the development of women's boxing in general. But I can tell you that any woman who has persevered to become an Olympian or become a world champion has put in the work necessary to do not only what men do, but also face some of those barriers that are particular to women athletes, the stigma, the less opportunities, the lower pay, things like that. So in general, I would say I'm inspired by every woman boxer. Sometimes I get goosebumps, watching especially like a teenager climb through the ropes and thinking, wow, even Clarissa, when she was born, that was the year that USA Boxing lifted their ban on women's boxing. So Clarissa Shields, an Olympic gold medalist, two-time Olympic gold medalist, never knew a time when she couldn't box. And then when she was young, there was women national championship was made available, world championships then became available, the Olympics then became available for her, and she ended up being a 17-year-old in the Olympic Games and going for gold. For me, that's super inspiring that a young woman especially, could live in a day and age where she really does believe that she can do anything she wants. I mentioned that I personally benefited by Title IX. So there were a lot of women girls and women that came before me that did not have opportunity. And I benefited by the work that they put into it. I benefited by the lawsuits and the struggles that they had to make sure that women had opportunities in education and in sport, in educational institutions. So I work really hard to make sure that I'm able to give back. And I hope I've been able to give back in some specific ways. I hope I've contributed to the movement.
Well, I think in mentioning the movement, and I think you definitely have, and being a pioneer and paving the way, especially with your book, The Ultimate Boxer. I want you to tell the listeners today a little bit more about what inspired you to write the book, The Ultimate Boxer, and give us a little bit more insight beyond just understanding, the sport of boxing, but particularly in terms of you really, in reading the book, I thought it was an awesome read. It talks technique, strategy, the mental aspect of the game. So share a little bit more about The Ultimate Boxer, please.
The book was published in 2003, and I wrote it because back then there was very little information on how to be successful in the sport. Back then, in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, this was pre-internet, really. People got their information from trainers at gyms. Sometimes those trainers would withhold information. Sometimes the trainers were misinformed. And so the whole point of writing the book was to level the playing field by writing a book that anybody could read. They could buy a copy, they could check it out at the library, they could read it at a bookstore, whatever they needed to do to have access to the information. It was really, really important to me. I had been giving some essays to boxers in my gym, and then that turned into finally compiling those essays plus some other essays into the book. And I get excited when people tell me that it's still useful to them, even, 20 years later, that it is useful or they find benefit in it. That's really special to me. I love it because it means that the work that I put into it paid off for them, and I love the idea of being able to pay forward.
I think it's a timeless read, and then also I do want to mention you own a gym in Nashville. It's called Fighters, and really talk about if you're not necessarily in competitive boxing, do you have other people that come and join and, as a club membership and just want to get in better shape no matter what age you are? Seems to give you some benefits there, not just cardio. I've boxed in the past, and it's definitely a strenuous workout, but what inspired you to do something community-based, and what's that look like for you on a day-to-day?
I founded Boxing Resource Center in 2001 as a nonprofit And I did that because I couldn't find a gym myself where I was encouraged to coach from a scientific point of view and work with anyone, literally anyone that walks through the door. I believe that anyone has the ability to learn boxing and benefit from it. Boxing is a tremendous sport if approached the right way. And so that was my interest. I couldn't find a gym where everybody was accepted, no matter who they were that walked through the door. So I had to start that. And so I founded Boxing Resource Center, and then we've had different gyms, different locations over the years in Nashville, where I live. As rent goes up and affects housing prices, it also affects spaces where small nonprofits would be, like us. And so about 5 years ago, I found an old steel cutting facility that was big enough to not only have fitness boxing and competition team boxers, but also be able to have events, clinics, camps, put on competitions. And so we are now in the West Nashville area, and our facility is called Fighters. So if anybody wants to follow us, it's Nashville Fighters on Instagram. And you can see some of the things that we do, some of the programs that we put together. You can see some of the people that we work with, some of the things that we're most proud of. And we really try to create a community where even fitness boxers, people that may never learn to spar or compete, are still part of the community. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in boxing to find a local gym and try it for yourself. Feel what it's like to hit a heavy bag and hit it as hard as you want and not have to apologize.
I like it. So what advice would you give, as we're wrapping up today, to any young female who is aspiring to be a boxer?
I would say go for it. There's no reason to wait. If you, whatever your concerns are, you can face those. You can, whatever barriers you think are in place, you can face those. And if you're in the right gym, you'll have a community behind you that can help. You'll find a community that can help you put some of those resources together or face some of those barriers in a supportive environment. And that's really what makes the difference for us as humans. We are social. We need to be in community. And boxing gyms are some of the most special places because they are diverse places. So find a local gym, get started. For those women out there who are thinking, well, I've taken the first step and I really want to be an Olympic champion or a professional champion, just boxing is one of those activities where you get out of it what you put in. So you do have to put in the hard work. It's got to be intentional work. Don't overdo it. Remember, you also have to rest. You need to have a balanced life, but put in that intentional work, educate yourself, and there are Olympic champions from all walks of life. There are successful professional boxers from all walks of life. So you can do it. I would say, and I'm not just saying that as a coach at a gym, but I'm saying it as an Olympic coach as well. If you believe you have it in you, then you do have it in you.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your passion for boxing and paving the way for coaches and other young boxers and community. It's definitely reflective in The Ultimate Boxer and your day-to-day as you still live and breathe in the world of boxing. Hi, Dr. Christy Halbert, you got game. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you so much.
It's been a blast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored the world of women's boxing with Dr. Christy Halbert. Remember to support female boxers in their journey to the top. And stay tuned for more insightful discussions on our next episode. Until then, keep fighting for what you believe in and out of the ring. Special thanks to my executive producer, Chris Pfeiffer. And I'm your host and producer, Sophia Fisher. Feel free to visit us at wgte.org/WomenGotGame.
WGTE. Voices around us.
WGTE is supported in part by the American Rescue Plan Act funds allocated by the City of Toledo and the Lucas County Commissioners and administered by the Arts Commission.